Brethren, it is a delight to be here tonight to share with you some information. And I want to start out by sharing with you some words of wisdom from Isaac Asimov, the famous writer, scientist, science fiction writer, scientist. And he said, the greatest advances in science do not come when someone leaps up and shouts, Eureka. They come when someone is looking at the data and goes, huh, that's funny. Well, what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to take you very quickly through the creation of American Freemasonry. And we'll lay it out in the timeline. And I find timelines are very helpful for me to see the way things are structured and where they come from. And what you've got to understand is the way we do Masonry in the United States is unique to the United States. It's not the way they do Masonry in England. It's not the way they do it in Scotland or elsewhere in the world. It has evolved differently in each country to meet their country's needs. And what I want to do is to take you through the way Freemasonry grew and developed and organized itself, and it has evolved into the complex and rich fraternity that we know and enjoy today. So that's what we'll be stepping through. We'll start out with the first stage. First stage of growth of Freemasonry in the United States, what I call the Grand Lodge stage. Now, in 1733, first chartered lodge in the United States is in Boston. St. John's Lodge No. 1 still meets there today. Actually, it's not St. John's Lodge No. 1. They have no numbers in Massachusetts. It's simply St. John's Lodge. They have no numbered lodges in Massachusetts. And they did get a charter from England. They are the first chartered Masonic lodge in the United States. There may have been other earlier informal lodges. Pennsylvania makes a strong case that they have a lodge older than St. John's Lodge. St. John's Lodge has said, well, you could be older. Show us your charter. Well, we don't really have a charter. Okay. We're the oldest lodge to put up or shut up. So that's the beginning of the Grand Lodge stage. Now, in 1776, we have American independence and also Masonic independence. At this point, the colonial Grand Lodges, or the colonial Masons, realize they can no longer continue to operate as part of England, as part of the Grand Lodge of England. They're going to have to declare their independence with the country. And so there's this lengthy process. In some cases, it happens overnight. In other cases, the Grand Lodge continue to write back home and say that we ask for instructions and directions. But independence, Masonic and political, starts in 1776. And then basically in 1806, this period is over when the Grand Lodge of Delaware is created. They were the last of the 13 colonies to get a Grand Lodge. And so the process of creating Grand Lodges continued through, I guess Hawaii was the last Grand Lodge created in the United States. And so it continued on for a century. But as a practical matter, the beginning of Freemasonry in the United States is this period here. From 1733 to 1806, about 70 years. It took them that long to get the Grand Lodge established, and that is the first stage. Now, at this point, we're going to take the first of our interludes. We're going to talk very briefly about Prince Hall Masonry, because that is part of American Freemasonry. I mean, if you are a sociologist and someone is going to explain to you what the Masonic fraternity is, they've got to explain to you what Prince Hall Masonry is. In 1775, Prince Hall and 15 other of his friends were initiated in Irish Lodge 441 with the 38th Regiment of Foot. Now, I'll tell you something that's happened recently that's very interesting. For a century or more, Prince Hall Masons have said it's 1775. Well, we had a brother in Washington State, John Hairston, said, I'd like to look at the minutes. So he went up and looked at the actual minutes. Didn't rely on someone else's transcription, didn't rely on what someone else saw. He went to look for himself, and he said, that doesn't look like a 5, that looks like an 8. And so now the question is up in the air. Maybe Prince Hall was initiated in 1778 and not 1775 because someone bothered to look at the original records. Doesn't hurt to do that every now and then. But this is the beginning of Prince Hall Freemasonry with the initiation of Prince Hall. Most likely 1775, but if Brother Hairston is right, it was 1778. That's something they're looking at now. Now, in 1784, they finally got a warrant from African Lodge number 459 from the Grand Lodge of England. And they had false starts. The way you would get a letter over to England is you'd write it, you'd give it to the ship's captain. If you were going to pay the fee for a charter, you would have to give the money to the ship's captain. And wouldn't you know it, oftentimes that money was lost between the United States and England. And so finally they found it on a ship captain, they got it over to England, they got the charter, and the charter finally made it back in 1784. So in 1784, African Lodge number 459 is chartered in Boston as an English lodge. 1827, African Lodge 459 was in an awkward situation. They did not ask to be part of the newly formed Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. Now, you guys probably remember this back when you were younger. If you knew your parents were going to say no, then you didn't ask the question. I mean, that's a smart way to do business. If African Lodge 459 has a pretty good idea that the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts is going to turn them down, don't even bother to ask. Just continue operating with the Grand Lodge of England. One of the sad ironies of history is African Lodge 459 is trying to continue to be a faithful English lodge. They're sending money for the charity fund over to London. They're occasionally writing letters for instructions and guidance. Total incompetence in the Grand Secretary's office in England. Some of the letters that Prince Hall has written are in the archives of the Grand Lodge of England. They just didn't bother to answer them. Finally, in 1827, African Lodge said, you know what? The Masons here in the United States won't have anything to do with this. England has stopped asking our letters. To heck with this. We declare our independence. We are our own Grand Lodge. And so they declared their own independence, declared themselves to be a Grand Lodge, and they started operating that way. And so thus was born the first Grand Lodge of Prince Hall Masonry. Finally, in 1989, starting in Connecticut, Prince Hall Freemasonry was recognized as regular. They've kissed and made up in almost all the states. I think there are 5 states left or 6 states left that don't have mutual recognition. Last one was just to tell you how complicated things could be. The Grand Lodge of Louisiana recognized the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Maryland. They wouldn't recognize the Prince Hall Grand Lodge in their own state because that Grand Lodge is having internal political problems. So they went and recognized the Prince Hall Grand Lodge in my state, which are a bunch of great guys. So anyway, that is an interlude, and that is part of the history that we have is segregated masonry in the United States that's slowly becoming unsegregated, desegregated. Now, the next stage of growth is York and Scottish Rites in the United States. In the USA, and I emphasize this is in the USA, the York Rite consists of Royal Arch Masonry, Cryptic Masonry, and Knights Templar. Nowhere else is that known as York Rite Masonry. If you go over to England and say, I'm a York Rite Mason, they'll go, huh? What's a York Rite Mason? Well, yeah, you know, the York Rite and the Scottish Rite. What's the Scottish Rite? They don't have the Scottish Rite, they have the ancient and accepted Rite. They don't like to attribute anything to Scotland, so if they can keep Scottish out of the name, they will do that. And the York Rite is only known as the York Rite in the United States. It is not a rite anywhere else in the world, just in the United States. But it worked very well for us. It was a series of higher degrees, and I apologize to the Grand Lodge for saying higher degrees. There's nothing higher than the Master Mason's degree. The Grand Lodge is in charge of everything. Okay, we got that out of the way. It is a series of additional degrees that the really eager Mason can take and can get involved in. There's some guys that Masonry really rings their chimes. They want to do, the more they can do, the happier they are. And so the York Rite evolved in the United States with the Royal Arch to the Royal and Select, and then to the Knights Templar. Also in the United States is what we call the Scottish Rite. It's called the Ancient and Accepted Rite in Britain. It is the 4th degree through the 33rd degree. It was invented in Charleston, South Carolina. The 25-degree system existed in France, known as the Order of the Royal Secret. It was probably invented by Stephen Morin on his way to the Caribbean. He established himself as a merchant in the Caribbean, and he started promoting this 25-degree system. 25-degree system made it to the United States. I think there were 8 or 9 chapters or 25-degree bodies that were set up in the United States. By the time we get to 1801, there were over 75 inspectors general roaming the country that could make anyone a 25th degree Mason, make them an inspector general also. And the boys in Charleston got together in 1801. They created the Scottish Rite, the ancient accepted rite as it's known in England, and that became if you will, the second branch of Masonry in the United States. So that is the second phase of the evolution of Freemasonry in the United States. The first is the Grand Lodge system. Then the second is our 2 high-degree systems. In the United States, we have 2, sort of like our 2-party system. We've got 2 branches of Masonry. Now, in 1798, as part of the growth of the York and the Scottish Rite, the General Grand Chapter of Royal Arch Masons is created. It was the first national Masonic organization in the United States. And the General Grand Chapter of Royal Arch Masonry covered the entire United States, except for Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania wouldn't join with them. Then in 1801, you have the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite. And I got their SJ, Southern Jurisdiction. Actually, it was originally the Supreme Council for the United States of America. And then it was not until 1813 that the Supreme Council for the Northern Masonic Jurisdiction was created by the Mother Supreme Council, and then the Southern Jurisdiction was created. So you can see this evolution coming about, and then in 1816, the Grand Encampment of Knights Templars are created. And so all the individual Knights Templar commanderies that were around the country came together and formed the national body that controls it. And finally, not until 1880 did the Royal and Select Masters, the Cryptic Masons, get their national body. But you can see this is the second stage of the growth of American Freemasonry. We have the Grand Lodge created. The Grand Lodge, that period ends about 1806. The little overlap here. Then you have the York Rite and the Scottish Rite are created as two functioning bodies. And that's the last detail is tied up in 1880. So now we have the first 2 stages of growth. Now we're going to take another interlude, and that's the Morgan Affair. And this had a tremendous impact on American Freemasonry. Just as an aside, John Disick has written a wonderful book on the Morgan Affair. If you want to know more, go buy his book. I mean, that's the place to start, and really it's a good place to stop. You don't need much more than that. He's done a brilliant job of this. And here's what happened in the Morgan Affair. In 1826, a Mason named William Morgan, who had announced that he was going to publish all the secrets of Freemasonry, is abducted in Canandaigua, New York. Now, it turns out that there is no evidence, no one has been able to find evidence that William Morgan was ever initiated a Mason. It's quite possible that he got a hold of an expose, memorized it, and then passed himself off as a Mason for whatever reason he thought useful. It's also possible that he was initiated and the records of the lodge have been lost. But we do know in 1826, after he had announced that he was going to publish the secrets of Freemasonry, he is abducted by a group of Masons. And by the time you get to 1832, the first successful third party in the United States is created, and that's the Anti-Masonic Party. Intervening, William Morgan disappears. There's no doubt that the Masons were responsible for that. My personal opinion is that they were probably trying to scare him, and that something they were doing to try to frighten him went wrong, and he actually wound up dying. Or they may have planned on murdering him right from the beginning. All we know is that William Morgan disappeared. So they convened a grand jury. The sheriff was a Mason, the judge was a Mason, and the chairman of the grand jury was a Mason. The optics of that are bad. That's what we would say today. The optics of that were bad. And so it led to the almost total destruction of Freemasonry in the United States. In Maryland, we lost 1/2 of our membership and 1/2 of our lodges. In New York, they lost 90% of their lodges. In Vermont, the Grand Lodge went dark, just completely quit meeting. Reverberations went all the way to Michigan, all the way down to Alabama. Lodges all over the country were feeling this. The Masons are a secret, sinister force within our community, murdering people that they don't like. And so, bad times for the Masons. It's not until 1841 that Masonry starts reemerging in the United States. And one of the effects that this had on Masonry, and it's an effect that we can still see today, is the Masons, as they were restarting lodges, restarting Grand Lodges, they wanted to be like Caesar's wife. And so that's when you started seeing Grand Lodges put in prohibitions about drinking alcohol at Masonic meetings. And so the prohibitions that continue today in many Grand Lodges can be dated back mostly to following the Morgan affair, when the Grand Lodges were trying to be holier than holy, above suspicion. So this is an interlude that had a tremendous impact on the way Freemasonry is organized. Now, the third stage, I believe, is the androgynous orders, the mixed orders that we have in Freemasonry. And that begins in 1850 with, you've probably heard of him, Rob Morris. I think he's well known in Kentucky. He creates the Order of the Eastern Star. Now, the Oddfellows had created the Order of the Rebecca a few years before this. So I don't know how much of this was independent with Rob Morris and how much of it was simply copying on what the Oddfellows had done and been successful with. But he creates the Order of the Eastern Star. In 1873, the Order of the Amaranth is created. Now, the Order of the Amaranth was the top of a 3-degree system, and you were going to have, the way it was set up, you had the Order of the Eastern Star, you then had the Queen of the South, and then you had the Order of the Amaranth. So it was a 3-degree system. The Queen of the South is still worked by Prince Hall Eastern Stars. They never gave up the degree. That degree never got traction in mainstream Freemasonry. So, and when it came to the Order of the Amaranth, the General Grand Chapter of the Eastern Star said, okay, here's the deal. We don't want anybody using us as a stepping stone to a higher organization. If you don't remove the requirement for being an Eastern Star from the requirements of being the Amaranth, we're going to make the Amaranth illegal to all members of the Eastern Star. And so that was the ultimatum they laid down. The Amaranth wanted the Eastern Star to be a stepping stone, so that first you had to join the Eastern Star, then you could join the Amaranth. The Eastern Star said, it's not going to work that way. No one's going to use us as a stepping stone. You're either going to be independent, or you're not going to, or none of our members will join. So that gets us to the Order of the Amaranth. 20 years later, the Order of the White Shrine of Jerusalem is created. And so that is the creation of androgynous Masonry. So you can see what's happening is each stage that we're going through is meeting a different unmet need of the customer base. We're creating Freemasonry. Then after we create Freemasonry, for those guys that are really eager, we're going to give them some other way to participate, and that's the York Rite or the Scottish Rite. And then we give something for the ladies to do, for your wives, your sisters, your daughters, and so on, and so they're going to be involved. And so the Amaranth and the White Shrine do that. So now we've got 3 distinct needs that are being met. And now stage 4 is the fun group. In 1872, the Shriners were created in New York City. In 1872, the economy in the North is really going well. The economy in the South is doing awful. This is after the Civil War. Their economic base had been destroyed. So they're really not ready for anything. But up in the North, the economy is booming, and they create the Shriners, the ancient Arabic order nobles, the mystic shrine. And when they create it, they did something that had a lasting effect on American Freemasonry. They said, for purposes of the shrine, the 32nd degree and the Knight Templar are the same. And so you can either be a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason, or you can be a Knight Templar York Rite Mason and join the shrine. And so that is the first of the fun groups that are created in 1872. Some 20 years later, 25 years later, the Grotto, the mystic order of veiled prophets of the enchanted realm, are created. You only need to be a Master Mason to join. You didn't have to be in the Scottish Rite or the York Rite. So the Shrine was definitely a more prestigious organization because you had to take more time and spend more money to join the intervening degrees. So now you get the Grotto created. Then in 1902, the Tall Cedars of Lebanon are created. That's primarily an East Coast organization. They've got forests elsewhere in the United States, but the Tall Cedars are primarily an East Coast operation. And they function very much like the Grotto and very much like the Shrine. They're not as, their temples are not as large as the Shriners' temples or even the Grotto buildings, but the Tall Cedars of Lebanon is another group. And then a few years after that, the ancient Egyptian Order of Science is created. That's primarily a West Coast order. So now you have fun groups to join. If you wanted to go out and have a drink with your buddies, if you wanted to have a party, if you wanted to march in a parade, if you wanted to do something frivolous and fun, join one of these groups. The Lodge, the York Rite, the ladies' groups, they were pretty serious, pretty uptight, I don't want to say, but they were not into frivolity. The Shrine absolutely was into frivolity. The Grotto absolutely was into frivolity. Tall Cedars, crazy guys. We've got a lot of Tall Cedars in Maryland. It's a mid-Atlantic organization, started, I think, in New Jersey. Now, with the fun groups, they had their own androgynous orders. You have the Daughters of the Nile for the Shriners. You have the Jesters, the Kabiri, the Hillbillies. Those are subgroups of the Shriners. So if you're really into what the Shrine is doing, you can join. Your wife can be a Daughter of the Nile. There are the other groups they have. There are extra groups within the Shrine you can join. The Daughters of Mokana are for the ladies of Grotto members. The Cedarettes, I think that's a pretty awful name, but the Cedarettes are the ladies group for the Tall Cedars of Lebanon. So they're just following what Freemasonry had done to organize itself and meet the needs of its members. And the way I like to look at these stages of evolution is they are meeting new needs of the members. You've got basic Freemasonry. You then have the high degrees or the additional degrees for the guys that are really active and into it. You then get into the ladies groups, so now the ladies are involved, and now you're getting into the fun groups. Now we get to stage 5, the youth groups. It has been said that childhood was an invention of the Victorian era. And that was because prior to the Victorian era, once you were big enough to hold a shovel, you went out into the field and you worked. There was no time of idleness, of learning, of fun or play as a child. You were part of the family doing whatever the family business was. So we have the creation of childhood, and now we need activities for the youth. In 1902, the 4-H organization was created. In 1910, the Boy Scouts of America was created. In 1912, the Girl Scouts of America were created. And in 1919, the Order of Demolay was created. And so the Order of Demolay, if put in that context, is simply a natural extension of providing a youth group for another group of children in the United States. Starting out with the 4-H, with the working on the farm, with the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, and now you have the Order of Demolay, meeting the needs of the young men in the community. You have Job's Daughters are created the next year. Rainbow Girls are created 2 years after that. So now we have met the needs of the children in the community, and in particular, the children of Brother Masons. What comes next? Well, the next thing are the invitational groups. 1870, the Order of the Red Cross of Constantine was created. There's an interesting organization created by Robert Wentworth Little in the library of the Grand Lodge of England. He was the founder of the Red Cross of Constantine. He said he found their rituals in the library, and so he reactivated the organization. Actually, he found the rituals of the Red Cross of Constantine published in an expose from the Morgan period. He lied about where he got the rituals. The rituals for the Red Cross of Constantine are the rituals for an order called the Holy Order of the Trinity. And so he plagiarized the degrees from an American expose, said they were from the library, and the Red Cross of Constantine is created. Today, the Red Cross of Constantine is a very respectable York Rite body. It's invitational. It's limited in numbers per state. You guys probably know all of this. This is one of the first invitational orders to be created in the United States. 1877, the Royal Order of Scotland comes to the United States. Albert Pike was the first provincial Grand Master, I believe. It has continued today. To join the Royal Order of Scotland, you must be a Knight Templar or a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason. I think you have to have been a Mason for 5 years before you can join, and you have to have shown service for the craft. So it's fairly limited in its membership. Now, in 1930, an interesting thing happened. A North Carolina Mason named J. Raymond Shute, and he was a guy that Masonry rang his chimes. They just rang his chimes, and he couldn't find enough ways to be active. So after he has presided in all the York Rite chairs in Monroe, North Carolina, that's where he was from, he created the Knights of the York Cross of Honor, where you have to be a past master, a past high priest, a past illustrious master, and a past commander, then to be invited and elected to membership in the Knights of the York Cross of Honor. J. Raymond Shute went on to create 10 invitational orders during his lifetime. 8 of them are still active today. Each one seems to be more restrictive than the other. The Rectified Scottish Rite, the Order of Strict Observance, when it started, was limited to 81 members nationally, no more than 2 in any state. That's getting pretty limited. The Society of the Blue Friars, I was Grand Abbot of the Society of Blue Friars for 15 years before I stepped down. 1 new member a year, and you must be a Masonic author. And the list goes on. 1932, Allied Masonic Degrees was brought to the United States by J. Raymond Shute. It was imported from England by J. Raymond Shute. It's another, as you know, invitational body with limited membership. 1957, the York Rite College is created. Again, now everyone's trying somehow to organize and to get under some type of systematic control of the York Rite. Well, you've got 3 independent organizations that don't always see eye to eye. And so anyway, the York Rite College is created in 57. Now, some of the rest of the groups that we have in the United States, this doesn't include everybody. We've got the Masonic Rosicrucians, Societas Rosicruciana and Civitatis Federatis. That came to the United States in 1880. National Sojourners, that is for veterans that are Master Masons in 1917. 1921, High 12 International. If you can't beat them, join them. And so now the popular businessmen's luncheon clubs that began with Rotary, and then you had Lions and Kiwanis. Well, now the High 12 is going to try to do the same thing for the Masons. It's a businessmen's luncheon club organization that's created in 1921. 1928, the Philalethes Society is created. This is a Masonic research society. If you're into the history of Freemasonry, to doing research into Masonic organizations, these are the guys that started the game. 1953, I'm particularly fond of this, the Invisible Lodge. To be a member of the Invisible Lodge, you have to be a Master Mason, and you have to be a performing magician. That's the way I worked my way through school, was performing as a magician. I've been a member of the Invisible Lodge since 1972, I think. There's an annual meeting whenever there's going to be a magician's convention. There's sort of a posters put up. Any member of the Invisible Lodge meet in room 312 or something. So it's just a group of guys that get together. And now here comes the big question. Here comes the thing that I hope you're going to take home with you and ponder about. We've seen the 6 stages of Masonic growth. We've seen the Blue Lodge. We've seen the York Rite, Scottish Rite. We've seen the ladies groups. We've seen the fun groups. We've seen the youth group. We saw all of the invitational groups. So this is even more exclusive for the guys that are active. And now what's the next thing that's going to happen? There was something for a while they were calling European concept lodges. These were lodges that were much more formal. They had dinners like this. People showed up at the meetings in tuxedos. It was the way people in the United States believed that European Masonry operated. Not all European Masonry operates that way, but it was a more formal attempt. We have traditional observance lodges. I know Andrew Hammer has been here and spoken to you guys before. Andrew coined the phrase traditional observance lodges or observant lodges, and what you're doing is it's a level of formality, it's a level of introspection that you don't find in normal Masonic lodges in the United States. We've got affinity lodges. Now, I'm seeing more and more affinity lodges. North Carolina has a lodge for the Tar Heels. I'm waiting for them to have a Blue Devil Lodge. If they have a Blue Devil Lodge, then I'll join it. In Washington, D.C., Colonial Lodge is for faculty and graduates of George Washington University. I was on the faculty when they were chartered, and so I'm a member of that. Oh, really had fun one night. They were initiating one of the vice presidents of the university because they had noticed at the alumni events, these guys would show up in black academic gowns, wearing these white aprons. That's what you wear at Colonial Lodge. And they were participating in the activities. And they were pretty active alumni. So he was initiated, and I had worked this out with the master, and they said, tonight, Brother Morris on the engineering faculty is going to give the lecture. Brother Morris, are you ready for the lecture? Yes, I am, Worshipful Master. Brother Morris. Brethren, let's assume we have a population of over 5,000 members, so that 5,000 men, so that we can apply the central limit theorem. And our goal is to select a sample of sufficient size that we can have a confidence interval with an error rate of less than 10%. Worshipful Master pounds the gavel and says, Brother Morris, that is the wrong lecture. You can lecture on that when you're in the classroom. Tonight, you need to give the entered apprentice lecture. I said, oh, Worshipful Master, I'm so sorry I got taken away. And what I was hoping that for just about 15 seconds, the candidates were sitting there saying, oh, dear Lord, a statistics lecture. What did I get myself into? Well, then I went into the entered apprentice lecture, and we gave that. So we had fun doing that. But Colonial Lodge is an affinity lodge. There it is for alumni and students of George Washington University. The Tar Heel Lodge is for students of the University of North Carolina. They just started a lodge in England that's the Science Fiction and Fantasy Lodge. It's for people that like science fiction and fantasy. What a cool lodge that must be. What kind of program? What kind of dinners do you have at a science fiction and fantasy lodge? Well, that is something that we didn't do a lot of in the United States. Our lodges tend to be geographic, not occupational. And so you will find in the United States that when we plop down a new lodge, it would be for everybody within a certain geographical region, not for all the bakers or all the butchers or all the candlestick makers. But affinity lodges, we're seeing more and more in the United States, and maybe that's the direction we're going to go. Internet gatherings. Certainly over the last 2 years, we have seen this upsurge in Zoom meetings and Zoom lectures because we couldn't get together face-to-face. Because we were locked down from the pandemic, we found a new way of meeting. Now maybe this is going to become popular. Now you can get those guys that are up in Idaho that are really interested in what your lodge is doing, they can come to the Zoom meeting. And so maybe we're going to see an increase in internet gatherings. And contemplative masonry. When I became a Mason, which was a long time ago, dirt was still a pretty new idea when I became a Mason. The idea of having contemplative Freemasonry, of sitting quietly in the lodge and meditating, it was unheard of. And now it's not a common thought. Maybe that is the direction Masonry is going in. Now, what I do think is going to happen, and we have seen some 300 years of this, Freemasonry evolves to meet the needs of its members. If the members cannot get together face-to-face in a room, well, they get on the internet. Internet was not available 300 years ago, but we're using the tools that we have at our disposal. So the takeaway question for you, what's next? What's going to happen? I don't know. If I were smart enough to know that, I would invest in it and I would become very wealthy. Or at the very least, I'd make sure that my lodge was doing the same thing. So there you see what I think are the 6 stages of the evolution of American Freemasonry that brings us where we are today with our complex organization. And at this point, I'll say, do you have any questions that I could answer for you or try to answer? Yes, sir.
I do, and I hope it's in context with what you were saying. In some of my readings, I come across Mark Mason.
Yes.
I don't know if it's appropriate to ask that question here, but could you tell us a little bit?
Absolutely.
How maybe it fits in.
The Mark Mason's degree, or the Mark Master Mason's degree, is a degree that appears to have originated in Great Britain. Scotland or England, that's one of those fights you just kind of step out of the room when the Scots and the English start at it. It is an additional degree. It's often thought to be a supplement of the Fellowcraft degree. And as part of the ceremonies, you select a mark. And this is your unique mark that is entered into the mark registry. And when you dress a stone in the quarry, you will put your mark on the stone. And that way they know to pay you when the stone goes up and the overseers check it out. And so in the United States, the Mark Master Mason's degree is part of the Royal Arch chapter. In England, the Mark Master degree is utterly independent and unconnected to the Royal Arch in any way at all. Has nothing to do with it. If you go over to England and talk to a Mark Master Mason and ask him about the Royal Arch, he said, well, I've never joined the Royal Arch. Why would I? I enjoy the Mark Master Mason degree. So in England, the Mark Master Mason degree is an entirely separate organization from the Royal Arch and the York Rite. But that's what the Mark Master Mason's degree is.
Thank you.
Sure. Yes, sir. The one in the you, sir, and then we'll get you in front of you.
Thank you, sir. If you talk about Christianity, you talk about any of the major religions, it's easy to talk about kind of an isolation because, without talking about the stuff that's around them. So you talk about Christianity, you don't talk about some of the other things like Mithras and the other stuff. It gets a little wonky. When you talk about Freemasonry, where does, for instance, some of the things that are tangential to it, like Knights of Columbus and some of the other organizations that are around us that grew up parallel to us, how do they fit into to what we are?
Well, here's the way they fit in. In the United States, there is a period that sociologists call the golden age of fraternalism. It's approximately from 1870 to approximately 1910. During this 40-year period, actually the period to 1920, if you take the 50-year period from 1870 to 1920, 300 fraternal organizations were created. That is one every other month, nonstop, for 50 years. And these organizations offered services to their members. One of the main services that they offered was insurance. Insurance was not part of the normal job package. And so if you wanted to be buried, if you wanted to have a life insurance policy, if you wanted to leave something for your wife and family, then you would join a fraternal group. Woodmen of the World is a perfect example of this. Woodmen of the World Insurance, I believe, is headquartered now in Omaha, Nebraska. The Knights of Columbus have 300 employees at their headquarters in Hartford, Connecticut, that does nothing but run their insurance business. They have, I don't know, $10 billion or something that they've underwritten in insurance. I mean, it's just breathtaking. I worked with guys that were in the Knights of Columbus. They say, yeah, Knights of Columbus, they got a pretty good baseball team that's fun to play. Main reason I joined is they got really good insurance. These groups provided additional benefits. One of the things that they did, that these additional groups did, the Oddfellows, the Red Men, all these different groups, they provided a community norm. So it was normative within the community for men to join these fraternal groups. Now, in many cases, their only interest is in insurance. So they're joining for the insurance. I want to buy your policy. Thank you very much. I'm not interested in the meetings. But it meant that when your lodge was going to have a fish fry on Friday, I said, I'm going to come to your fish fry on Friday, but I want you to come to our ice cream social that we're going to have in July when we're selling ice cream to raise money for our thing. And you said, you got a deal. I'll come to your. So it was a normative part of the community. today, those services, those fraternal groups that offered insurance don't exist anymore, because now there's Social Security, health insurance, life insurance is now part of a typical employment package. So these groups no longer had a raison d'etre, and so they faded away, which meant that it was no longer socially normative to belong to a fraternal organization. So that was one of the things I believe that these organizations offered, is they established part of the community standard, the community norm that Freemasonry was part of. And I believe the gentleman in front of you had a question?
I hadn't heard yet a mention of the military lodges and their role in bringing Masonry to America in its early stages.
Military lodges were, you primarily saw them during the early part of the community. By the time you got to the Civil War, Grand Lodges were reluctant to charter military lodges. They were afraid that the quality of the members might go down. Some of the Grand Lodges did create military lodges during the Civil War. The very best book that I know of is by Michael Halloran, who's a past Grand Master of Kansas, and it's The Better Angels of Our Nature. And it's just published by University of Alabama Press, and it's a brilliant work on Freemasonry during the Civil War. But the military lodges were primarily popular during the Revolutionary War. By the time you get to the Civil War, they were not so popular, and they're hardly popular now at all.
And I may be wrong, tell me if I am. A lot of the lodges on military bases today are actually Prince Hall, even if they're not primarily African American.
Prince Hall, particularly the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Oklahoma, has been very aggressive about chartering military lodges at bases. Mainstream Grand Lodges have not been doing that. And so they have been relying on the lodges in the area where the base may be located. And if you think about it, we have almost forced Prince Hall to be in that situation, because we wouldn't allow them to visit our lodges. They couldn't visit the lodges around the base. So just like in 1827, when they declared their independence, they said, fine, you won't let us sit in your lodges, you won't let us visit, we'll set up our own lodges. Thank you very much. And they did that. A question over there, sir? And then I'll take one more, and then at that point, I'll stop.
So I'm going to take you back to stages 1 and stage 2. Why, in your opinion, was there never a successful effort to organize a general Grand Lodge?
The question is, why was there not a successful organization of a General Grand Lodge? And there was for the Royal Arch Masonry, in what was it, 1798, I think, the General Grand Chapter. I think part of it was everyone liked being the big dog. As long as we don't have a General Grand Lodge, my state runs its own business. I don't want those Tar Heels telling me what to do. I don't want those Marylanders. You know what the Marylanders are like when they, are out fishing in the Chesapeake Bay. I don't want them to be like that at a lodge meeting. I suspect it was petty jealousy, that they thought that they would have better control. And there's one other thing to keep in mind. It's also quite practical. At that time, traveling to a national meeting for anything, with the country spread from Maine down to Florida, or Maine down to South Carolina, or is it Georgia? Well, whatever it is right above Florida. And then going west, think of the logistics nightmare of bringing everyone together for a national Grand Lodge meeting. It would have been impractical. So that's sort of a rambling set of reasons of why it didn't work. And I suspect the main one was personal control. We don't want them people on the other side of the river telling us what to do. We can screw things up ourselves. Thank you very much. We don't need your help. And then there was a question on this side, I believe.
Well,
yes, sir.
I think you might have answered some of this already, but it was about the affinity lodges and also Prince Hall lodges. So I think I even read it in Idiots or Dummies that the only American Grand Lodge that has a charter from the Grand Lodge of England, is it one of the Prince Hall lodges? And number two, talk about the military lodges. When you're talking about the affinity lodges, in some ways were military lodges sort of along the same concept as what you're talking about with affinity lodges? In other words, I understand that, you know, what you were talking about is that there are lodges created with people that have specialized interests. But I also know that certain lodges, like military lodges and my friend's lodge in Canada, they all kind of come from the same cloth. It could be law enforcement, or they could come from dock workers. So is that similar to what you consider?
Yes, that would be an affinity lodge. To answer your first question, African Lodge 459 still has their charter, 1784 charter from England. It was severely damaged in a fire. There's a dramatic story of the Grand Secretary of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge in Massachusetts crawls back into the burning building to rescue the charter. And when you see the charter, it's its own parchment, and the parchment is charred and has wrinkled up on one side from the extreme heat from the fire. I don't know of any other lodge in the United States that has retained their colonial charter from England. African Lodge 459 still has their charter. And I'm sorry, and the other question was?
No, I think just about the fact that there are lodges, when you were talking about affinity lodges that are kind of specialized, I was thinking about military lodges, but also lodges that have been created, you know, perhaps by dock workers, or let's say firefighters, or law enforcement. Specifically, it seems like that might still fall.
Well, you can find lodges like that. When I became a Mason in Dallas, Texas, back in 1971, I was told that East Dallas Lodge was the firemen's lodge. I said, why is that? Well, I don't know when it started, but the firemen all started joining East Dallas Lodge, and so now you'll find not a majority, but a significant number of their members are firefighters. And so lodges will evolve like that. I've attended affinity lodges in England that the affinity has now faded away. Alfred Robbins Lodge used to be composed of newspaper workers, and they all joined Alfred Robbins Lodge. Today, Alfred Robbins Lodge has few, if any, newspaper workers. I happen to visit the lodge. And so the affinity lodge doesn't always stay that way. Now, I think Colonial Lodge, which has a requirement in its bylaws that you must be an alumnus or a faculty member of George Washington University to join, that's probably going to stay connected to GW. Same like the Tar Heel Lodge in North Carolina. And you see that type of thing happening if a lodge is near a factory, near some, employment center, that you may see men attracted to that lodge simply because it's nearby. But the lodge was not explicitly started to serve firefighters at East Dallas Lodge, just like science fiction and fantasy lodge. That's pretty explicit what they're going to do. And I think that's a cool idea. And now, one other thing that I'll mention that is different, certainly in England, lodges in England tend to be no bigger than 30 or 40. By the time a lodge gets to 50 members, the thought is split it in two and have two lodges. My lodge, Quattuor Coronati, has never had more than 40 members. It's a very small lodge. We just had 18. We're over 200 years old. I'm not going to try to remember the date. But that is a significant difference. They would never think of having a lodge with this many brethren in it in England. It would be much smaller. And for good or ill, that's the way they evolved. One last thing that I will comment on is that today many of us are looking enviously at England and say, boy, they have a lean and mean organization. They have these small, efficiently run lodges. Boy, I wish we could be like that. Well, several decades ago, English Masons were looking at American lodges and saying, oh my gosh, look at the network of hospitals that the Masons have built. Look at the lodge hall that a single lodge owns and controls. It's magnificent. It's something that we don't have a thing like this. How can we be like the American lodges? So there was a time when people were envious of us. The times, times changes. With that, brethren, I'm going to stop. I would much rather stop with 2 or 3 questions not asked than go on even one question too many and have you think to yourself, oh dear Lord, when is he going to shut up? So I'm going to be here afterwards. Would be happy to chat with you. Thank you so very much for listening to me.